What happens every time you go through a bottle of Yellowstone Select? A percentage goes back to the National Parks Conservancy. You want to save our parks? Drink more Yellowstone. A very traditional Kentucky straight bourbon, 75% white heirloom corn, 13% rye, the rest in malted barley. Traditional because Kentucky grew corn. Wasn't rye, wasn't barley, all that had to be imported on buckboard and mule. Now, there's 7 major distilleries on this old Bourbon Trail map. That's similar to what I grew up with. Born and raised in the state of Kentucky all of my life, there were 7 major distilleries through the majority of it. And 6 out of the 7 of those distilleries employed a Beam as their distiller or master distiller over the years. On the Beam side, there's been a moniker. It's flowed through the family from generation to generation. It's a moniker only a few Beams ever attained. The moniker in which I speak, owner and distiller. Only a few Beams ever owned their own distilleries, one of which was Minor Case Beam here in this picture, Stephen Paul's great-grandfather. Minor Case Beam owned the old Trump Distillery down in Gethsemane, Kentucky. You can't make this stuff up. And at that time in Kentucky's history, he was making Kentucky's finest, Old Trump whiskey, well received in and around the Kentucky area. Y'all heard of Jim Beam before? Why the heck haven't you heard of Minor Case? They distilled during the same time period because he passed away. 115 days after Prohibition was abolished, Minor Case Beam passed on, never to get his old Trump distillery reopened again. Now, distillation didn't stop on this side of the family at Minor Case's passing. It continued on with his son, their grandfather, Guy Beam, master distiller of the Fairfield Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, post-Prohibition. On to the other side of the family. We're on Mama's side of the family now. Notice how her name is Kathleen Dant Bowling. You see how that Dant just slipped in there? Does that make J.W. Dant Stephen Paul Beam's great-great-grandfather? On their mother's side? Tells me the boys weren't born, they were distilled. You get my picture? He was one of the finest distillers in the state of Kentucky of that age. Distilled his first distillation off a still he built himself, a log still. The second distillation was off a pot still he carried across the United States on his back to start his distillation program. A solid copper still like the one we use here today. The copper jug, spigot on the front of it, that's the donut jug, the yeast strain of a master distiller. Stephen Beam, all practical distiller, took that jug from the Getz Museum directly to Dr. Patrick Heist. Dr. Heist owns Wilderness Trail Distillery. Inside that distillery he has a laboratory called Firm Solutions. A laboratory bigger than our entire distillery. Dr. Patrick Heist scraped the inside of that jug, took the DNA off the inside wall, matched it to one of his 1,000 cryogenically refrigerated yeast strains. 100% genetic match, which means it was Minor Case Beam's yeast from 100 years ago. Jurassic Park style, bringing back an old Trump whiskey of the future. Over 68 different brands of bourbon can relate themselves directly back to a Beam family distiller, and now growing. It is the most influential family in bourbon history, bar none. You're currently standing in the only Beam family-owned distillery left in the world today. And that's our story. Church is out.